Hi readers, I'm Jess.
And I'm Abby. Thank you so much for joining our August book club when we read
Normal People
by Sally Rooney. So this book follows two friends, Marianne and Connell. They grow up in Carricklee, a small little town in Ireland. And Marianne's kind of the outcast. Connell is way more popular, but they meet and actually become friends. And they become so close that their lives are sort of intertwined. And then they both end up at Trinity in Dublin for college. And again, their lives intersect and they find themselves inseparable once again. So this book really follows their intricate friendship and romance over, 4 or 5 years. And I absolutely loved these two. I loved this whole book.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to discuss it with you guys.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. I really like this book too. It was the first book by Sally Rooney that I read, actually. So it was my introduction to her. And I couldn't put it down. It was so good. Marianne and Connell's relationship was really interesting to me. It really did feel like a relationship that a lot of us can relate to in many ways. So I think Normal People might be a fitting name for the book. But the relationship between them starts off in high school, and Marianne, like you said, is really an outcast. Connell is very popular. What did you think of their relationship during that time when Connell kind of ignored Marianne in public?
Well, it's so interesting, right? Because they're from two different classes. So Marianne is uncool, but she's also rich. And her mom employs Connell's mom as their housekeeper and cleaning lady. So the way they meet is that Connell comes to this mansion to pick up his mom from her sort of weekly house cleaning, times. And so that's how they meet. And so they have this sort of private friendship behind closed doors where the kids at school are not privy to their conversations. And I think they actually surprise one another. He doesn't know much about her and she sort of thinks he's too cool for her. But they surprise each other in sort of their intelligence and emotions. They open up to one another.
I like how Connell is kind of like taken aback by Marianne a lot of the times when she just says these really strange things to him, especially at first. He's kind of like, what did she just say? But also he's really into it. And that kind of like sparks the chemistry between them.
But then at school, Connell does not pay attention to Marianne. He really sticks with his buddies, who even actually make fun of her.
Yeah.
So he doesn't participate in actively making fun of her, but he also doesn't stand up for her or say like, hey, she's actually kind of cool. So I thought that was really, really relatable, actually. I have to say, like, part of me wanted him to be braver and have sort of a thicker skin, but we all remember like being in high school where like it is really hard to go against the grain.
It's brutal, and you either like stand with the people who are making fun of someone else, or you go up against them and risk losing your own status, which sounds so bad, but also that's just the way it was. And Connell was very scared to lose his status as the cool guy in high school.
Yeah, and he ran with that crowd, and he was not about to make waves, especially for Marianne. So I thought that was interesting. Like I wanted him to be better, but I'm also like, hey man, I get it.
You can't hate him for it, basically.
Yeah, but I actually enjoyed the sort of poetic justice that happens when they get to college.
Yes.
And all of a sudden Marianne is like totally cool and she's got all these friends and now he feels like a fish out of water.
Yes.
In this university where, other kids have money, so she sort of fits in with that. And, he hears them all, like, all these kids sort of bloviate in class, and he's like, oh, everyone's way smarter than I am. Even though they're not, they just have this bravado that he did not necessarily bring to college with him. So it was an interesting
turn
flip.
of events.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marianne really like grew into herself, I think.
Totally. I loved her. I felt myself so much in Marianne. Like, I was such a dork, and I was not cool in middle school and high school. And my dad used to say to me, he's like, oh, just wait until you're an adult. Like,
it gets better.
It gets way better. You'll be like, and I feel like all those people who peak in high school,
that's really, they all go
downhill
from there.
So if you're not peaking in high school, it's good. You still have up to go. So yeah, she really does come into her own and feels almost more comfortable in her skin.
Yes.
As she gets older.
That was one thing that I appreciated throughout the entire book, is that, like, I could relate to her more so than I could to protagonists that are just beautiful and gorgeous all the time.
Yeah.
I felt like Marianne was kind of awkward looking. She had crooked teeth, and, sometimes her hair was not perfect, and, all these different things. And I was like, wow, like, I can see myself. So it was refreshing and nice, and I did also relate to her, growing into who she wants to be, despite all the hardship that she faced in high school.
Yeah,
and at home.
I love, sort of Connell's internal monologue. Like, I also actually found myself in his shoes a lot, sort of like the questioning that we each do about, like, where do I belong and what do I want to do and what am I good at?
Do you think he ever really found his place?
I think he's beginning to find it as the book ends. Like, when he submits that story for publication and the editor's like, this is great, we got to publish this, and he sort of freaks out and is like, no. But he, at the end, is accepted to this program in New York, and she encourages him to go. Like, I think she understands that he needs to find his path.
Yeah.
So one thing that was interesting that most of you said is that you were confused by the lack of quotation marks around different characters' voices. So it was, I thought it was really interesting, actually, like a good technique that she uses.
It took me a while to get used to it. I am not going to lie. I would have to reread certain things to be like, wait, who said this? But I did get used to it, and I did come to appreciate it as, like, her style. Although I have to say, some of the things they said, like their normal conversations, were so weird. I was like, in what world? Like, I loved it, but I was just like, this is such strange conversation that they're having right now.
Is it at all because they were Irish, do you think? Or just is this Sally Rooney's internal monologue that we're seeing?
Maybe a mix of both. I did love it, but it was very strange. I was like trying to picture myself saying some of these things on the day-to-day, and I was like, what? This would never come out of my mouth. But but I did get used to the lack of quotations. That's something that I needed time to adjust to. Yeah.
One thing I thought was so interesting was their relationship and sort of how close and intersected they are. I mean, I definitely had a relationship in college that felt a lot like this.
And I also have one that I can think of right away.
And it's sort of like you vacillate between being best friends and romantic partners, and then it's almost indistinguishable.
Yeah.
And then it's so valuable because it's a friendship that you treasure that's sort of wrapped up in the emotions of love. And you can't just break up with someone like that.
No, you become so close to that person, whoever that person is, because they are your best friend and you've shared things with them that you've probably never shared with anyone else. I mean, Connell and Marianne have these moments of intimacy, and Connell sometimes gets freaked out at how much he tells Marianne and how, weird the stuff is that he tells her, and he confides in her because he knows she's not going to tell anyone else, but there's this special connection that they both have. Yeah, and I think that's a special kind of love, even if it's not, boyfriend, girlfriend labeled.
Yeah.
It's a very special kind of love. What really got me in the book was when Marianne was like, well, I was never his girlfriend, so I'm not even his ex-girlfriend, so we can't even break up, and I'm basically nothing. And I felt that hard.
Same, girl.
I was like, how do you describe these relationships to other people?
I know.
You're not really dating, never really together.
And certainly Connell's mom wonders the same thing.
My God, Lorraine.
Yeah.
I loved her.
Me too.
She was a very strong character, and she told Connell when he was being, a jerk.
And I thought it was so interesting, when they had other relationships with other people.
Yes.
That I was like, this relationship pales in comparison to, what you have with each other. But with Connell and his sort of girlfriend, what was her name?
Helen.
It was almost so bland that that's exactly what he needed. He didn't need the drama that sort of came with the Marianne ups and downs.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm like, oh, Helen, this is snoozy. Come on, break up with her. Get back with Marianne.
I think sometimes just the strength of how strong their relationship was emotionally was very scary to both of them, and maybe that's why they decided to, search elsewhere. But I definitely felt like, why are you with other people when you know that you should be with, each other? It was very kind of hard for me to read because I was rooting for Marianne and Connell just because we got to see all sides of their relationship and from both perspectives.
Yeah.
And I realized how much miscommunication there was. It drove me insane. Oh my God.
When he wants to ask to move in with her to stay in Dublin for the summer, but he thinks that she doesn't want that, and so he doesn't ask directly, and so he ends up moving home. And then she's like, oh, he just broke up with me, basically.
Yes.
And he's like, I bet you'll want to see other people. And she hears that as, I want to see other people.
Yes.
I'm like, come on, you two, get it together. Say what you mean. And mean what you say, and cut out all this bullshit.
Yes, but at the same time, I've done that.
I know, we have all done that, which is why this is so
Yes, but it was cool to see from both sides because you were able to see oh, he was thinking this the whole time, she was thinking this, and neither of them decided to tell each other the truth about how they were feeling.
It was driving me crazy. It's like a game of telephone where you're like, that was not what was said originally. Hello. So what I want to talk about is how, Marianne's sort of sexual proclivities, she likes to be dominated and she likes to be submissive with her partner.
And it gets stronger throughout the years.
Totally.
Yeah.
Which I think is in direct relation to the sort of violent upbringing that she had.
Yeah, that was really rough to read. Basically, Marianne's brother, Alan, was very abusive to her.
And her father.
And her father was. And her mother is just not there for Marianne. In fact, she's almost rooting against her. Whenever her brother lashes out and does something absolutely awful, her mother will blame her, essentially. And it doesn't matter what Marianne does. She can't escape it.
My heart just ached for Marianne. And so you can sort of see that's where she ends up, is sort of needing to be almost choked in order to like feel like she's being loved.
Yeah.
So for her, like violence and love and not feeling good enough, they're all tied in together.
Yeah.
So I was so actually like glad that Sally Rooney put that in the book, because I think it just makes Marianne such a even more multidimensional character.
Yeah. And she even struggled a lot with depression and eating. She throughout the book, she just stopped eating full meals, and I thought that was like something that's really hard to talk about, but also important to put in a book.
Yeah.
You know?
And I really liked Connell's struggle with
Mental
depression
health,
and mental health and seeking help from a counselor as a college-aged man. I thought that was so valuable to read.
Yeah.
And not discussed enough. The sort of struggle to ask for help and then to seek help from a professional.
Yeah.
And it does, begin to help him sort of come out of this fog. So at the end, I felt so hopeful for these two that almost like, yes, Connell might go to New York and they might have separate chapters like they've had before, but I do feel like they're magnetically drawn to one another. Like they're going to come back.
They have always come back to each other no matter what has happened. So I think it will happen again. And I think that they are each other's lifelines when things get really bad and they have nowhere else to go. They always wind up back together.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting that they each called the other in an emergency situation.
Yes.
Like Connell, after he was robbed and he was beaten up, calls Marianne, even though they're not together. And they're sort of actually like mad at each other. At the end of the day, he's like, your number's the only one I knew by heart.
Yeah.
And then she calls him after her brother like hits her in the nose and she's bleeding and wants to get out of her house. They're not together at that time either, but the only person she knows to call is Connell.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, like these two, they can't be separated. They're like magnets.
They're soulmates, maybe?
Maybe.
Do you think they are normal people? Do you think they aren't? I want to know what you think.
Well, I think it's so interesting that they each, like, they reference this sort of like, oh, we're not like normal people. Because, like, what is a normal person?
Yeah.
There is no such thing. And so for me, I felt so connected to both of these characters in different ways, that it's almost like all of their feelings and depression and love and anxiety and like that, it normalized it for me to feel this way. And so, it's almost like Sally Rooney's creating this new, section of normal people that are all weird and crazy and nuts and, in love and then out of love and mad and glad and,
all these different things.
Exactly. It was like, oh yeah, like this is what normal people are.
Yeah.
So I think this idea of like, oh, normal people doesn't exist, but these two helped me feel like, oh, okay, everyone feels like the way that I do.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's always really nice to find when you relate to characters so strongly.
Well, I have to recommend that you must read Conversation with Friends.
I know. Honestly, everyone has been telling me this.
So good.
I will pick it up, I promise.
Yes. But actually, I have to say of the two, this one I loved just ever so slightly more than Conversations with Friends.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah. So I'm dying to know what you think.
I will let you all know.
What you think. If one resonated with you more than the other. Not to pit them against each other, but well, we absolutely love this book, and we're so glad you read it along with us this August.
Yes.
We will, of course, keep posting some discussion questions in our Facebook group for you guys to talk about amongst yourselves.
Yes, and let us know in the comments of this video what you thought, if you agreed or disagreed. We like to hear from you.